Hello, I'm Chris from Discount Aquarium Fish and Reef in Tempe, Arizona. Today we're going to talk about canister filters and give you some tips for buying these, keeping them in the game longer, and saving you some money. Canister filters can be great on freshwater aquariums. They can even be used on saltwater aquariums. They are like a big media reactor, so you have your biological with your bioballs or ceramics or whatnot. You have your mechanical with your sponge, and if you add other forms of media like carbon, you can have your chemical filterization as well. The first thing in strategy when you're wanting to use these on all of your aquariums, pick a brand that you like, and whether you buy it new or used, make sure to use the same brand model. If it's too big for some of the smaller tanks, that's fine. You can always cut down the flow. But buying the same model is going to mean that all the parts are going to be interchangeable. And that way, if you have a problem with one filter, if you need to buy a part but it wasn't the fix, it didn't fix the problem, you've got that extra part left over, you can swap parts to troubleshoot what might be wrong with one filter. So it's always best to stick with one brand rather than have a mix and match of a bunch of other brands of filter. This filter is a Cascade. I tend to like these. One of the things I like about them is their plunger for starting actually works. Many of the canister filters, the starter plunger does not tend to work really well. Generally only a problem with your first startup, because after you've got a canister filter up and running, when you go to maintain it, you unplug it from the power, you switch off your valves, whatever valve type system it has on it, and then you can take either the valves off or the whole lid off. Go ahead and do what you need to do with the canister filter. When you come back and put that lid back on and open up these valves, those tubes are still fully charged with water. It will go ahead and prime itself and the water will siphon down into the filter. When you're setting one up for the first time, that's not the case. So generally they've got a plunger or something in order to start that siphon process. Like I said, many of the units it doesn't work all that well. What I like to do, which kind of circumvents the problem, I keep a small pump around, and we're going to talk about how to use this also on canisters that have a bad motor. But I pull off this strainer on the intake. I've got my tubes up into my tank. I fire up this pump. It will circulate water through the filter. Then I plug the filter in and I'm good to go. So if the plunger didn't work, I'm still not having a problem there. Now, canister filters can have things go wrong. The first thing we're going to talk about is the gasket. The head gasket on a canister filter will last longer if you use a product. I use what's called Wonder Lube from the pool store. It's like a silicone lube. If you lube that gasket, it will last longer. It keeps the gasket lubricated so it doesn't get old and crack. Also can help seal a gasket that's maybe a little bit compromised. So I do recommend getting that. One thing that's kind of a bummer is sometimes the canister will be leaking from the head area. You'll go ahead and make the investment and you'll order a new gasket for that head. You'll put it on and it's still leaking. Unfortunately, in this case, there's something compromised with the motor unit, or there's something compromised with the body that's causing it to still leak even though the gasket's been replaced. If you have other filters of the same brand, you can go ahead and take a head off of another unit and stick it on that body. You know it's not leaking on the other unit. If it's still leaking, then you've got a problem with that body. So you know that's a bad body. Somehow it has swelled or something's compromised the upper lip of the body. If you go ahead and put that head on a good body and it's still leaking with a new gasket, then you know there's some problem with your motor unit, in which case you're going to just take out the parts you can use, the impeller, whatnot. You know the body's good, so you'll save that in case you need it on another one and go from there. The other thing that can go wrong on these guys is the impeller on the inside of the motor unit. So sometimes when you plug one in, it sounds like the motor's running, sounds like everything's good, but it won't pump. Generally, in this case, it's going to be a bad impeller shaft, a broken impeller shaft. Unfortunately, for most canisters, you can't buy just the shaft. You'll have to buy a new impeller, but you can still save that old impeller in case you need one where you have a good shaft on another unit. They all have a way. This comes off on the inside here, and then you can pull the, there'll be a little cap on top of the shaft, and then you can pull the shaft out. Sometimes it'll come out with the whole impeller. Be careful because these are ceramic. They can break very easily. This one is good, it's not broken. I usually use a pair of tweezers or needle nose. Makes it easier to lift this impeller out. Impellers should, this one's a little dirty, but they should be smooth. They shouldn't be barrel shaped. If it's barrel shaped, that impeller is getting water somehow through a crack inside and swelling. It's going to be a bad impeller. If you have a bad impeller and it's in the unit too long, sometimes it will swell up and get stuck in the unit, or it will swell to a point where it routes out the impeller housing here, in which case it's going to ruin your motor unit and no longer be usable, except we are going to give you a tip to still be able to use that filter with a bad motor unit. So that's about impellers. Now they can be a little bit expensive, which is why, again, it helps to have more units of the same kind. If you have what you think is a bad impeller, you can always pull an impeller out of another unit, see if the head works with the new impeller, because sometimes there's a motor problem, then it's not going to work with the new impeller and you've just spent money on parts that you don't need unless you have other units that are the same type. So sometimes we are going to have a unit that has a bad motor. The motor's not working, or we didn't want to replace the impeller. Otherwise, that unit's not usable because we can't pump water into it. But what many people don't realize, as long as we get water into the filter at the proper gallons per hour, which you can look up online for any filter that you may have, we can go ahead and buy a submersible pump. And you're going to want to buy one that has a strainer on the outside of it. And we can figure out a way. This way, I got some tubing that would fit over the intake on the outtake on the pump. I take the strainer off of here, which, by the way, when you're using it to start a filter, you take that strainer off, just shove this up to it to pump the water through. But in this case, I'm going to use that tubing, and I'm going to connect this little pump to the intake on this filter. This way, when I drop these in the tank, I fire up the pump. Doesn't matter that my motor unit is not running because it's going to pump the water through for me, and that's going to turn this filter back into an operational unit. You will have a small pump hanging in the tank, but you've still got a filter that works and can keep that guy in operation longer. Now, a couple tips for buying a used canister filter. It's very important that it has all of the parts that it's going to need to work for you, because putting in parts, putting in media and whatnot is not cost effective when you're buying a used one. You want it to have everything that it needs. You need to make sure it has its tubing. You need to make sure those tubes are long enough to get up to the height of the tank that you're going to use it on. And you need to make sure that it's got some U-tube apparatus with a strainer for your intake. And for your outtake, it might be a spray bar, it might be a simple unit like this. It doesn't necessarily need to be exactly what came with that unit originally, but you don't want to have to scramble around to get your nozzles, because that can be a hassle. It can also be expensive. Tubing's not cheap. Make sure it's got that stuff on it. Also, you're going to want to ask the person on the phone before you make the time to drive and everything else like that, does the filter have media? You don't really care about carbon because it's going to be bad anyway and you'll have to replace it. But you are going to want the baskets to have their ceramic media or bio balls, and you're going to want the filter to have sponges. Again, if you have to buy these new and put them in, it's going to drive up that cost on your used filter. There's other ones out there, so buy one that's got its media in it. Next, make sure that they'll be able to show the filter working in water, hooked up to a tank, hooked up to a bucket, something like that. Easy reason for that is you can plug it in, it can sound great, everything can be great, but it can have a leaky gasket, it can have a bad impeller, it can simply not be pumping. So it's not good enough just to plug it in and hear it work. You're going to want to plug that filter in and have it pump some water and know it's working that way. And again, you're going to get all the same units, whether you get them used or new, so that you can swap parts, exchange parts, and be set for a long time of using these filters and keeping them in action. Hope you've enjoyed the video today. If you ever have questions or have a video topic you'd like us to cover, just go ahead and look us up online, Discount Aquarium Fish and Reef. You'll find our Instagram, you'll find our Facebook, you'll find our email, you'll find our website. All of those have ways to easily contact us and get that information. Or you can see question and answers that have already been asked on those platforms on our website. Scroll through those, see if you might find something that you're interested in. We'd be glad to help you. I'm Chris Kline. This is my time.